Okay, welcome. I had a particular dilemma for my latest project. I wanted to build a new form of interface design that doesn't come straight with Xojo. It was a bit of a radical design. It needed to be, a really good interface, one that would let me do things like drill down through a series of objects that appeared on the screen. I also wanted it to be really easy to be able to use, so that users wouldn't require any training. It needed to be simple, it needed to be intuitive, it needed to be able to handle an unlimited number of objects that may appear on the screen. It also, therefore, because we now had a potentially unlimited number of objects on the screen, it needed to be able to scroll through those objects. I wanted it to be able to work with both a desktop application as well as a Windows application and use the best of each of those environments. I wanted it to be able to actually be nice looking for the end user, to be able to come in and make an attractive application out the other side. And while it needed to be simple, it needed to be flexible for the user so they can change based on different configuration how it actually appears and looks on the screen. And because you've got lots of these objects on the screen, they needed to flow around in the available space. So when the user either resizes the screen or resizes the objects on the screen, they will automatically flow into the available space. So that was my dilemma. How do I create this paradigm, this new interface to be able to do that? Well, first of all, let me go through some of the things to not do. My usual approach, and unfortunately this is one of my existing applications, is don't do ugly. So some of the downfalls that I have done in the past are things like trying to fit too much on the window at one time. So that is a bad approach that I'm having to relearn. Some of the ways that in trying to fit too much on, is I go and just say, okay, I'll put them behind a tab panel. And so that way I can fit even more and more and more on the page. Well, I want to avoid that now where possible. List boxes, cramming too much into list boxes so that you can't view them properly, and no means of configuring what particular columns are able to show. And too many buttons. And I know when I've failed when I have so many buttons on the screen that I go and put a pop-up bevel button down the bottom, which then pops up and shows dozens of other options in the one button. I wanted to keep away from that as much as possible. Also, things like help text. Help text that appears on the screen every time and takes up way too much room. Always on display, even if you can resize it, no, I need to move away from that. The other thing is where on the screen everything is desperate for attention, and so much for attention that really the user doesn't know where to look and where to click. So, how do I stop doing my bad practices and do the things that really I should be doing instead? Less is more. Have less on the screen at one time. So that's one of the things I'm aiming to do. Have more white space. So that means having things like white backgrounds to the page and the objects. On the web, having white styles, having white borders of things. So in the end, what you have are objects or containers, things like that, floating in a sea of white space. If something needs my attention, then it has a colour. In my case here, I've chosen blue, but you can choose whatever your colour you want. Those are the things that get your attention. If something you don't want it to have attention, either have it greyed or black. If it can be selected, have it the primary colour. If it can't be selected, have it grey and disabled. So that way the user is drawn to the things that they're supposed to be drawn to. So typically in a web app, what I do now is I have the 3 tabs across the top: list, criteria, and fields. By default, you go into the list view, but you know what a list view looks like. What I wanted to show you here is the ability for any user to be able to go in and choose what they want to have. So they can have the default list view, but they can go into here and see the fields. You can then click on the left-hand side here, click the box, you click on a tick, it'll get rid of it, toggles on and off, so to choose what particular fields you want to display or not. You can change the column sort order by highlighting one of those fields and either select them all on or off, or even moving their order up and down through the list. And so that not only changes the column order as to how the user can configure it to display. If they've got a big display, they can turn on more fields. If they've only got a small display, they can turn off the fields if they wish. And then of course down the bottom you have the ability to change the row order by setting a selection field to sort by. So that's the fields area, lets the user configure however they want. In the criteria tab, I'm not showing that, but basically that lets you set as many different rules as you want, with things like you can choose any particular field and say, look, it needs to contain this, less than, greater than, equals to, all that sort of stuff. Set as many criteria as you want, and each of those areas, whether you set the criteria, whether you set the fields, as soon as you click back on the list tab, it then displays only the information you want for it to display. The other thing which I will be you'll be seeing later, is having the toolbar on the being vertical on the left-hand side, with things like log out up the top, help, and the whole go back side always up in the top left. So wherever you are, however far you've drilled down, you can always go back, you can always get context sensitive help, and you can always log out if necessary. So there's some of the things that I'm doing to help the user have a cleaner interface, and yet it is still user configurable. Things like the help, instead of it always being on the window, when you click on help, help is now full screen. It shows you every possible help topic on the left-hand side, but the context-sensitive one that you've chosen is the one that will be highlighted. The advantage of this is it encourages users to learn more. If they see other topics of interest, they can click on that help topic, it'll bring it up, they can find out about it. In the top left-hand corner is a search capability. So if you have many different search topics, they can search on for one that they want, and then it'll filter down the list, click on the one that you want, and get more information about it. What you're seeing on the right-hand side in the help is an HTML viewer. So the help is all HTML based. The advantage of that is that it gives you the ability to put in things like bullets or numbering. It allows you to do a lot more fancy formatting. It allows you to put in pictures, tables, whatever you might want. It also means that that HTML help section, I have a choice. I can bundle that in with my application so that help, when people download the application, that is fixed for that particular version. Or you may decide that when I click on items on the left, it actually points me through to a website externally to my application. Another advantage is, you can see down the bottom, we have the ability to export. So if the person does want to export the help as HTML, they can. If they want it as plain text, they can. I can strip all the coding out of the HTML. Or if they want it as a PDF, I use the WK HTML to PDF helper application to just take the one copy of the help, turn it into a PDF on the fly, and allow the user to download it or open it up. Okay. So, what I've started to do in my interfaces is have less on each page, to have a left-hand vertical toolbar. Since screens are usually wider than they are tall, use the left space. To have it so that when you drill down, that left-hand toolbar changes and another one replaces it. And certainly on the desktop, you can either hit the escape key to jump back up a level, or there's usually a back button that lets you jump to the previous level behind. And on the right-hand side of the toolbar, to have a minimal amount of information. Don't try and cram everything in. Just put in only the necessary information that you need. And use page panels. Page panels are definitely your friend. This application that I wrote here has essentially one window for the whole of the application, and everything, everything on the screen is actually one page panel. The application as a whole has about 40 page panels built into it, but as you click on particular buttons on that page panel, as you drill down, it then just loads up another page panel or then jumps back to particular page panels. So that way you can make a very nice, concise application that is nice and easy with just the information you need, and yet it still allows you to jump around to different panels if you need. Okay, what other benefits do we get from this particular design? Well, it allows me now to take one idea that I might have for an app and use it in many different locations. Not only if I create a desktop app, can I do the obvious thing, build it for Windows, Mac, Linux, Raspberry Pi, not a problem there. Stick those up on my website. But it allows me to also take that application, put it into the Mac App Store, put it into the Windows Store, the one application again. And because this design is the sort of thing that can be replicated across a Mac application and a web-based application, it allows me to put my web application, or the web version of the application, in three possible areas. One is that I can have a public version of the web app for everybody to connect into. If somebody says, look, I want to have my own data in its own silo, but I don't want to have to run my own server, it means that I can put it up onto as private, but on my own server on their behalf. Alternatively, if they say, no, we want it entirely on our boxes, then I can give them a copy of the web app with a license to put on theirs. So without even talking about mobile, we have potentially 9 possible end locations that we can sell our applications for from just one idea. So, what I see here is we're starting to see the blurring of the desktop app and the web app. I don't care if people want to run a desktop copy of my application or a web or both. I've even written an application. This is from a presentation I gave across in Germany at a Xojo conference, Monkey Bread conference, where I had the same application running on desktop and on web, and I built a desktop application that has a web app embedded into the desktop application. You may go, why would you bother embedding a web application inside a desktop application? It's because web applications are often a pain in some regards. They're a pain to install, they're a pain to run, they're a pain to update. But what's great about a web application is that when you do actually update it, everybody gets the new version. You don't need to install it on 1,000 desktops. But what's great about the desktop application is they are easy to install. Either drag and drop or build an installer for them. Desktop applications are easy to run and they're easy to update with things like Sparkle. So what the desktop application does with the embedded web application, it allows you to click on a button and start the web app, stop the web app, check every minute to see if the web app is running. If the web app isn't running, then the desktop application can launch it and make sure that it's running all the time. So we're seeing this blurring of the two and in fact creating hybrids where they're actually able to get the benefit of each. Okay, so that's a bit of a roundabout way to get onto the topic of this of my presentation, which is this new interface, this fluid UI interface. What does it look like? Well, as you can see, it looks like a series of 2D and 3D pictures. The 3D pictures, looking like a cube, are the equivalent of what we know as folders. The flat 2D pictures are usually the equivalent of what we would know as a file. The 2D pictures, those images, you can see the image of one in the middle there, is usually the image itself is based on the content of the file. So when the document goes back into the system, it examines it to see, is this a graphical image? Is it a JPEG? Is it a PDF or whatever it may be? Can I open it up as a picture? In which case it places an image of the content as the file's image there. If it can't find any graphical information in the file itself, then it just grabs the file icon and uses the icon as the image on the screen. If you want to select particular objects, then it puts a grey rectangular border around them. Now that, on the desktop, is just a rectangle. So that picture is embedded inside a rectangle, and the way that I can determine whether an item in this whole list is selected or not is how thick is that rectangular's border. If the rectangle's border is 0 pixels, I know it's not selected. If it's, well, I set it to 4 pixels. If it's more than 0 pixels, then I know that that object is selected. So that way I can click on a few of the items and have them, and know when they ask to perform an action, which particular ones are selected or not. Now, what's interesting about these pictures is that they can be resized themselves at any time, and they will flow into the available space that you've got on the screen. Or if I resize the window, if I make it wider, then more fit horizontally and the rest flow accordingly. If I shrink the window down, then again, they adjust accordingly. The other thing that I've done is the left-hand toolbar, I usually have either black or grey, so the left-hand side doesn't grab your attention at all. In fact, as I'll show you later, you can actually shrink it down and make it disappear so that the thing that you need your attention on, which is your files and folders, can be the only thing that display if you want. But up in the top left-hand corner, just so you're aware, the left-hand icon is actually for your contacts. The next one along is groups, and the current one we've got selected is your file locations, which by default they're the cloud versions. Let me just zoom in that a bit. So you can see that in this desktop version, we have a couple of cloud storage locations. Local documents, which is items you might have stored in your local hard drive, but we can map through to other areas, your Dropbox, your Google Drive, your iCloud, your OneDrive, whichever one you want to actually look to find your files on. The other thing that I've done in this particular design is give them a padlock. The padlock refers to the safety of the particular file. Because this is encrypting the documents behind the scenes, if something is showing as green, it means that it's not only it's protected, it's encrypted, but it means that it's not actually being shared. So we have 3 different colors of padlocks: green, amber, red, like traffic lights. If something is amber, that means it's actually being shared with 1 or more people or 1 or more groups. If somebody has taken, if it's a file and it's being shared and somebody's taken out, the padlocks then show as an unlocked padlock. And when it actually shows as being unlocked, it also goes to being read. In other words, a bit of danger, that file is somewhere, maybe on my computer, maybe on someone else's computer, it is in a decrypted form. Okay, now all of these images that we're seeing on the screen are actually stored in the database, the metafile database on the cloud. But because you want speed, whenever you connect onto the system and go, okay, tell me what I'm allowed to have access to, either things I own or things others have shared with me, it brings down those particular images from the database and caches them locally so that things are nice and fast. When you quit out, it gets rid of the local cache so that next time you connect in, if there's been any updates of the icons, you can see what the new icons look like. So that's what it looked like on the desktop. How does it look on the web? Well, essentially it looks the same. Except there is one difference. You don't have access to your local files. I can't get access to things that are on Dropbox or iCloud or OneDrive. The only thing that I have access to is are my cloud versions. But the icons are exactly the same. The only other difference is up in the top right-hand corner, because that's typically where they are. It's got who the current user is logged in as, and it's got a picture of them, and that's the ability to log out of the system as well. So, how does it work? Well, we can resize the particular objects themselves. They can be absolutely huge if you want, if you cared, or they can be shrunk down to be tiny. It's up to you. You've got a slider so that you can choose whether you want them to be small and show more on the screen, or if you want to zoom in and show less on the screen. It's entirely up to you. Now, of course, on the browser, it's going to be a lot slower to do the resizing of the pictures or resizing of the window. And so I don't provide any live scrolling of the slider, live viewing of the slider. When you choose particular objects, then you've only got to select one or more, and all the left toolbar changes into the possible actions you might be able to perform on those. Other things that I do is I make the padlock resizes proportionally. So when they're tiny, when the icons are tiny, the padlocks are tiny. When the icons are big, then the padlocks are big as well. On the desktop, I'm able to change the text size easily, so that the text size is also proportional. Now, there's a limit I go to, because you don't want the text on the desktop to be tiny or stupidly large, so I do set limits on them. But I haven't easily been able to do that on the web app. I'm hoping with Web 2.0 that will actually change, that I will be able to easily change the text size on the web version as well, so it will get larger and smaller. But the way the environment works is that, look, if something is a folder, I can double click on it and go into it, and it refreshes with whatever's in that folder. And I can go down as many levels as your operating system, or on the cloud, there's actually an infinite number that you can go down as well. So you can drill down. If you get down and double click on what is a file behind the scenes, then it's going to open up, it's going to decrypt and open up that particular file. So it's a bit like, or it is very much like what we have in operating systems now with the Finder or with the Explorer. It also gives you a breadcrumb trail. It's a bit hard to see. A breadcrumb trail as to sort of where you're at the moment. So you can see the Qubits Cloud thing there. That would then show you, as you drill down into different areas, it will show you where you're actually located, where you're actually viewing. Now, one of the things that I found was when you have more than, say, 50 items on the screen, it can get a bit slow to actually say, more on the web than the desktop, but it can get a bit slow to say, okay, where should I position the items on the screen and do the resizing of those pictures to fit into the available space. So what I've done is I've separated place this object in this location, separated that from the actual redrawing of the icon itself. So that redrawing, I've got a timer inside every single one of those little objects, and so what I do is when the person resizes the window or resizes the item, it says, okay, boom, very quickly, boom, 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 here's your new location, and each one of you set your timer to run so that when you're ready, resize your picture to the available location. You'll see that in a minute. The other thing that you can do is you can customize your picture. So you didn't have to put up with what's there by default. So this is on the web version. It comes with a whole lot of standard pictures if you want. You can keep them as 2D or make them 3D and resize them. And you can even add your own pictures in there so that you can make them look however you want. You can customize the look and feel of the environment how you want. Now, I used to use the OpenGL routines to be able to build this, to create a 3D cube. But that started to break, and so now I use the Einherjar aspect routines to take an image and skew it, which I'll talk more about later. But basically what it is I take a flat, square object, 1024 by 1024, and I give it a grey border around the outside just so you can see where the border is. I then darken it twice. I use the MBS routines to actually take the original picture and darken it 25% and then darken it 50%. I then skew that picture into the different locations to create a 1024 by 1024 image of a cube. That then gets returned, and then I resize that however I want. Now, what I do behind the scenes is I take that, I don't bother, I'm never going to display it as 1024 by 1024, so I actually shrink it down to 512 by 512, and that's what I stick in the database, and that's enough resolution for any of the stuff that I need. Okay. All of that is fine, but the demo is the really important thing. That's where the fun starts. So this, what I've got at the front here is the desktop application, and behind I've got the web application for the same thing. So you can see all my images there. If I click on something, you can see that it puts the border around the outside. If I hold down the Shift key or the Command key or the Control key, it means that I can select more than one thing if I want, and then I can right-click and say whatever I want to do with that particular function. If I resize the window you will see that it automatically adjusts nice and fast on the desktop. You can sort of move as fast as you want and it'll resize into the available space. So you can see as I go wider, fits more across. If I make it narrower, it scrolls down. If I make the window too small, then I can now scroll down through the objects in there. But what it means, instead of having to put information into a list box, which is what I might have done beforehand, I can now have a nice, beautiful graphical environment. If somebody has lots on the screen, they can shrink the particular images down to about, I think that's 50 pixels by 50 pixels is what I go down to. If we want to scroll up, you can see, you can absolutely make it enormous, 512 by 512, I said, is what it goes to. And as you can see that as I shrink it up or down, the padlocks resize, and you can see the jump between when I locate them, and you can see there's a bit of a jump as it refreshes the icon as well. That was the splitting of those two. That's the timer running, doing its thing behind the scenes, so that it doesn't matter how many objects I have on the screen, it's still able to draw them for the full size that is available. Now on the web, as I said, it's a bit slower, but the same sort of thing. I can resize the window and it automatically adjusts and puts the information into the amount of space that I have. So if I go wider, I can fit more across. As I shrink my window down, you can see they then wrap onto the next page or onto the next line. Same thing, I can decrease the size of the files if I need, make them smaller, or if I go, no, I want them to be a little larger than that, I can bump up the size if we need. Okay. The other thing that I can do on the desktop that I was showing before, the whole thing, less is more. I've got a splitter on the side. I can make it bigger. I can make it smaller. So now if I can even get rid of the left toolbar entirely. So I have a lovely, clean user interface with just the information that I want the user to be able to see and without anything else. The other thing that we can do about here is that by default, you can see it's got the contacts highlighted on the left. By default, it just shows my particular documents. But there's no reason why I can't, if somebody calls me up and say, oh, have you seen such and such a file that I've been working on, I can click on the documents of another particular person and it will then refresh and just show me the documents that either I've shared with them or they've shared with me. And if I hold down the Shift key, I can select more than, whoop, I'm selecting the lot now. So what that will let me do is find all of the information for those particular people. Now that's working on an individual basis. There's no reason why I can't do the same things via a group. So I can click on the Groups tab there, see all the groups that I'm a member of, and see what particular things that those are the groups I'm a member of, and what things do we have access to. Again, if I come and click along on the data locations, then that shows the things that I've got in the cloud. If I go, look, I don't care about the cloud, I just want to see what's in my local documents on my hard drive. There are the things in my hard drive. These are the files that I've got in my Dropbox, in my Google Drive, on my iCloud, and that sort of thing. And you can double click and go in and see what particular files and things might be inside there as well. Okay, so I don't care if people use the desktop version or the web version. Of course, the desktop version you can see the local files, but with the web version, when you're seeing the cloud files, you're seeing exactly the same thing from one to another. Okay, let me go back to the. We're doing well for time. Any questions so far. I'm about to jump to something a little different, but anybody got any questions on what we've been looking at? Yes?
So what's the reason you decided to go with a slider instead of a set small, medium, large icon size?
So the question is, why did I go with a slider rather than a small, medium, large? I think that the slider that goes across the whole screen down the bottom is now ugly. I'm going to be getting rid of that. Most applications only have a very small slider. The main reason was because that I didn't go small, medium, large is because there's a huge range of possible sizes from 50 pixels up to 512 that I allow people to go to. The slider is potentially a problem. If you want it a little bigger or a little smaller, that can be quite hard on a small slider. So I think the best paradigm is to actually have a slider so you can move a large chunk of the way, but then if you have a plus and minus, that lets you do both the big increment and the small increment of the file size to flow into what you need. So I'm going to go back and change the desktop version of the app to use what I'm using on the web, which is a small slider with a plus and minus next to it. Even the plus and minus next to it actually increase and decrease it by 10 pixels. So because it's doing one, you'd have to click it too many times to adjust. Okay, any other questions so far? Good? Okay, so what's actually happening? How are these things all working behind the scenes? Every single one of those objects that I'm displaying on the screen that we are seeing as a picture is actually a container. And I keep them as an array of containers. The reason why I keep them as an array of containers is when you jump into a new area, you drill down into a new area, I don't need the old containers anymore. I redim them, I close them, I wipe them, and rebuild that array and say, okay, display it on here. When I go to resize the window or I go to resize the icons on the window, I don't need to go back and refresh that array. That array is still valid. All I need to do is tell that object that instead of, if you've got, what have we got, a dozen objects on here, I just need to cycle through all dozen objects and say, instead of appearing here on the screen, now appear in this new location. And if your icon needs to change, we'll adjust yourself accordingly. So what we do is we have an array of containers floating around on top of a white canvas. That's what we're actually seeing on the screen. On the top, I use a normal Xojo toolbar, which I might be getting rid of and customizing, but it works fine. On the left-hand side on the desktop, I use a page panel so that as I click on the different objects, contacts, groups, location, it adjusts that page panel on the left-hand side. On the web, I use different containers. So I put all the containers on the screen and I just make them visible or invisible according to which particular ones that I want, and that's nice and fast. As I mentioned before, on the desktop I've got a window splitter, which I use the Einherger window splitter to make that larger or smaller and give me an ultra clean interface if need be. The padlocks I use, obviously I have a separate icon for each, whether it's red, whether it's green, whether it's blue. I have a large version of the icon. I think it might even be like 100 pixels in size, which is way bigger than I'm ever going to need. And then I just shrink it down using the Monkey Bread software, I think it is, to actually resize the pad. I give the object the particular padlock color, and then part of that whole routine, the timer to go, okay, resize your main picture, it also, in that timer, resizes the padlock to be the particular size, and whatever colour it is that I gave it, it's just going to do that. Same with the text size, not a problem, that's just a normal Xojo command. When I encrypt the files, when I take them out and put them back in again, I'm using normal AES 256 encryption. Sometimes I use the Monkey Bread software, sometimes I use the Einherjar encrypt engine to do that. When I transfer the files up to the server, I have a choice of 3 possible locations. Behind the scenes, they store them in exactly the same format, in the same sort of embedded folders. I use either kubesql, can actually, you go as if I'm going to be storing the file into the database itself, but it's smart enough to know, okay, don't put it into the database, just put it into the operating system beside the database, so that means the database doesn't get too big and it makes backups a lot easier. So there are 3 possible ways of storing the files: kubesql, SFTP, or AWS, and I've now worked out how to use the curl libraries to not just store in AWS but also Alibaba if need be, and potentially other systems as well. So most of that technology is using the curl MBS libraries. Regarding the metadata base itself, by default I'm using kubesql, but I've got the system set up so using the SQL database MBS where I'm database agnostic. If you want to export the data out of one, put it into another, it'll work perfectly well. I adjust according to the minor different types of syntax that there may be. So I support behind the scenes all the metadata of who the contacts are, what the groups are, what permission do I have, who's shared with what does the file icon look like. All of that can be either in kubesql, MySQL, or Postgres. Choose whichever you want. The main reason why I allowed more than one database is in case of scaling or in case of customer requirements. As I said before, how do you know which one is actually selected, therefore to perform actions on? I just have a round-edged border around the outside of, I make it 4 pixels. In other words, it's either 0 or greater than 0. Also already mentioned before, the creation of the cube itself, the cube-looking object. It's not really a cube. I'm not using OpenGL anymore. It's using Einherjar's tools to do that. When I have contacts and I want to display a picture of the contact, there's a great website. You just hash the email address, the lowercase version of the email address, send it off to this place called Gravatar, and they will send you back an icon for that user if they've got one. And so that just makes life a little easier, and then I cache those just locally to make life a little faster. I intend to put the ability for people to put their own contact pictures up there if need be, but anyway, that's a technology I use. I use 2-factor authentication within the application so that even if you happen to be using this program in a cyber cafe and somebody's got a camera looking at your laptop and you type in your username and password and they've got it, if they try to use that username and password on a separate machine, it'll come up and say, fine, you can, but you have to authorize yourself first. It will send a code to your email address. You need to put that code in so even with the correct username and password, you can't use the application. You need to put in the code to authorize that machine. Even if you authorize it and then leave the cyber cafe and go, oh my goodness, I forgot to deauthorize that computer, you can log into another machine, go into your preferences, you can see exactly the particular machines that you have authorized and click on it and deauthorize a machine. So that's pretty cool. The way that the authorization works is I use, MBS has a unique user ID, UUID tool to be able to get the operating system and something about the startup hard drive. It gets a hash from that. That's what I use. On the web, how do you identify yourself? On the web, I found the easiest way is to just generate a random, totally random, 32-bit random string, and I save that as a cookie. It expires after a year. Again, it stores it in the server so that you can deauthorize it if need be, but that becomes the unique ID for that particular machine. So, for example, if you're in an office with a whole lot of cubicles, you may want to say, look, I can log in from this particular desk, but not that desk, and authorize them as need be. So that's how I do the two-factor authentication. I'm going to expand that so that it not only uses email to send your code, but uses your phone, sends you an SMS, and I'm going to give people the choice to go, okay, I want to authorize via email or SMS, or even potentially both, and possibly even every single time that I log in, that I need to. So in other words, it doesn't authorize that machine from then on. Every time that that I as a user connect on, I must send a code before it'll let me log in. Just as greater security. And as I mentioned before, when I'm looking in the desktop app at my local files, it's actually using the local operating system files and folders. So when you see a cube as a folder, that is actually on the desktop, it maps to a real folder. And it can not only map to these. If you stick in a memory stick, it'll appear. If I'm logged into a file server, I can see what's on the file server, locally mapped drive. Again, all entirely encrypted, so you can layer this level of encryption over and work in any environment that you want to. But when I'm mapping to real files on my computer, Windows or Mac or Linux, it's a real folder. Now, when you go to a cloud-based service, well, there's no way that I'm going to, in my program, look up Amazon and find out what directory structures and things I have on there. So on the cloud drives, it's a fake system. So yes, it looks like I've got folders and files within folders and folders within folders, but it's not really. It's purely in the database. That file structure for the web is different from the local in that it knows it's the native path, in a sense, behind the scenes is fake. Now, in terms of the location of when I say, where do I go and put my object on the screen, what I do, let me just zoom in so that we can see that a little better. Oop, I went too far. Let me go back. I'll stop it. So there's a few things that it needs, hopefully. Let me just jump straight to it. That might be the easier way. So this is the slide and display. Okay, there's a few things to, if I've got 50 objects that I want to display on the screen, how do I know to place each one in what particular location and then flow it around? There's a few things that I need. I need to know the total, not only the total number of objects, but I need to know which one is. As I'm cycling through the array of the 50 objects, say I'm up to object number 10, I need to pass it that we are this is object number 10 that's going to appear on in the total order. I also need to pass it how big it is, what's the width and height of this particular object. I also need to pass it, what's the available space? If somebody's resizing the screen, how much space are we talking about that we can work with? I also need to pass it any padding information. There's two lots of padding. padding around the outer side so that everything doesn't look crammed against the edge, so there can be, you know, a margin padding, and also padding, and how much padding do you need or want between the objects themselves, just so that when you have them all together, they're not jammed close. So I pass all of those parameters and say, okay, this is object number 1, tell me where I'm going to be located. Object 2, tell me where I'm going to be located, based on this same information. What this routine returns is based on that information. You should be left this amount and from the top that amount. That's all it is. I return that as tab delimited. In other words, just 2 integers with a tab in between. It says you're left this, and from the top you're that. And so that way it's very quick. You know, 50 times, cycle through, call this routine. This one is left this, right, you know, boom, 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 boom. Return those, display them quickly, get on with the program, each time starting their timer to redraw the picture into that location, and you're done. So that's how many lines it is to be able to display that on the screen, which this should be available for you to be able to see later. So I'm not sure if you're welcome to make use of that code. Now I'm running out of time, so I've got lots of information on how to create hybrid desktop and web apps if you wanted to ask me later or see this, because I have been able to extract the code out and put it in a common area so you can see. Don't have time to go through it now, but happy to talk about that later. Problems that I've got a number of issues to solve. I'll just display these on the screen for you. Yeah, how to do dark mode, how to make, most web apps use a round contact icon, how to do uploading and downloading successfully, what feature set might you put in a mobile app, how to do, you know, on the Finder you can sort of click in the white space and drag, and whatever's in the rectangle they highlight. I'm not sure how to do that in Xojo. How to create a modern UI that will hopefully come with Web 2.0. Will it scale if we have 100 or 200 people accessing a web app? Will it just kill it? What about variable size objects? All my objects are the same size. What if we have some that are rectangle, horizontal, vertical? And finally, drag and drop. At the moment, if you drag and drop something into a web app, it replaces, your Xojo app gets killed and it tries, Safari or whatever it is, tries to display it as an object. I want it so that when I drag and drop something from the Finder in, it actually, Xojo knows about it, can deal with it. Okay, so those are some of the problems I still have to solve. That's the end. Are there any questions that people still have? Yes?
Do you integrate with Active Directory or Open Directory?
So the question is, do I integrate with things like Active Directory? No, I don't. If somebody wants that, I'm happy for them to pay for me to add it in. We do have the technology to do that. People have asked me, oh, you should integrate with Facebook, you integrate with Google. I have deliberately kept away from that because I don't want to be dependent on someone else's technology. In the past, over the last few decades, I've been burnt multiple times when other people's technology that they have dropped or start charging for, so I'd prefer not to do that. But if somebody wants to create a bespoke version of my app where, yes, it will authenticate, particularly obviously on Windows, so it can connect in using existing usernames and directories, I'm happy to do that. Or LDAP as well is another alternative. All sorts of things like that are quite possible with the technology we have. I have not put it into the application. Yep.
You also mentioned that you use cookies for your authentication. What do you do when the user deletes the cookies or they have their browser set to not save
So the question is regarding the cookies in the web app, what to do when the user says not to save them or deletes them or something like that. Then that would, I don't keep a copy of that cookie elsewhere. That would mean that that machine for your particular login is now deauthorized. So when you came along to that machine, each time, or maybe after it expires after a year and deletes the cookie, whichever thing happens first, you put in your username and password, it would come up and say you need to reauthorize this machine, put in the code that's just gone to your email or your phone. Any other questions? Okay, well, see me later if something occurs to you that you haven't covered. Thank you.